Hello, writers and creators. I see you need a respite from that manuscript. Well then, avert thine weary eyes from screen or notebook, so that we may engage in theater of the mind. Or, of the ears. And, well, actually it's a lot less theater and a lot more people just having a conversation. But it's a good conversation, and you get the idea. This is Fictitious, a podcast about writing and genre storytelling, presented by Nerd for a Living. I'm Adrian Buskey. This is our proper first episode of Fictitious, and I'm excited to kick things off by talking with Lauren Shippen, the writer and creator of The Bright Sessions. The Bright Sessions is a science fiction audio drama about people with supernatural abilities in therapy. It's a serialized podcast where each episode is a therapy session between a patient and the enigmatic Dr. Joan Bright. And now you understand where the title comes from. The Bright Sessions premiered in 2015 and has been featured by iTunes, Vox, Wired, The Observer, and Popular Science. In 2016, it was the recipient of 7 Audioverse Awards. As an actor in Los Angeles, Lauren Shippen created the series as a writing experiment and creative outlet for her and her friends. It's her first serious writing project as an adult, and its success has made writing a dominant part of her career now. In this conversation, we explore the genesis of the show, developing from a single character idea to an elaborate audio drama. We discuss the benefits of writing episodically and the freedom of her story format, and how characters evolve off the page when they're embodied by passionate actors. And we talk about how her story became an outlet for her dealings with anxiety and mental health issues, and how that opened a dialogue with the show's fans. So Lauren, first off, thank you for joining us on the Fictitious podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to have you as one of our first guests, because I think what you are doing right now is a really interesting example of genre storytelling now, which is the audio drama, which is this kind of like old school idea. You know, you think about radio dramas from back in the day, and then that's something that sort of vanished in like the public consciousness for decades. Mm-hmm. And then the world of podcasting brought it back in an enormous way. You know, it's really been embraced by audiences again. I'm a huge fan of the format, and I really like your show.
Thank you.
And I think it's interesting. We met you at Emerald City. You were on our Nerd for a Living panel at the show. And we also saw your Bright Sessions panel. Because I was right after you. It was funny because we didn't even know it was happening because we were doing so many panels ourselves. Yeah. And so we were showing up to do my animation panel, and then you guys were already on stage. And we're like,
That's right.
That's fantastic. So it was like, it really worked out, really nicely. But there was something that you said when you were on the Nerd for a Living panel. You talked about how you came out to be an actor, like a singer, an actor, a performer. Mm-hmm. And then you started writing for Bright Sessions, and that was kind of like your first real writing project?
Yeah, it was the first script that I've ever written. I'd written, I'd started some novels back when I was like a preteen and teen that are terrible, and had, written some short stories and tried my hand at songwriting for a little while, also very bad at that. And then I hadn't done any creative writing probably like since high school. So by the time I was starting Bright Sessions, like it had been about 6 years since I'd done any creative writing. And I'm always, thinking of characters in my head. And as an actor, you kind of have to come up with the backstory and fill in all the blanks in a script or a play that you get for the character. So definitely sort of imagining story was something that was always going on in my head. And I was rarely actually putting it to paper. And then finally, I just thought, you know what, I'm gonna do something myself that I can act in myself and that I can cast my friends in, that will be low maintenance and low budget, and we can just do it for fun and we'll see what happens. And it's kind of exceeded, I think, all of our expectations wildly.
Well, I mean, the show has been featured on iTunes. You've been written about in like Vox and Wired and The Observer and Popular Science, and you've won a bunch of awards and stuff.
Crazy.
So, I mean, that's kind of the best kind of side project, is the one that you kick out to have fun and try something new, and then it ends up being really successful. But what was the germ of the story? Like, where did that begin?
I really started with the character that I play, a girl named Sam Barnes who time travels when she has panic attacks. I knew I wanted to do something in audio because I was listening to Welcome to Night Vale a lot and Cabin Pressure, BBC radio comedy, and had been in web series with friends and done short films and stuff, and kind of knew the manpower and the money that was required to make something like that. So that maybe I can come up with a simple story that I can do in audio. I have a degree in music, so I knew a little bit about audio editing. And I started to think about this girl who had anxiety and was maybe, transported to different places. I wasn't quite sure it was time traveling when I started thinking about her. I thought maybe she traveled into different universes or other planets, or briefly I thought maybe it'd be cool if she traveled into other, like into books and could like meet, the characters in literature. And then I thought, no, that would be way too hard to do. And then eventually it became time travel. And as I was thinking of her character, I realized I needed to give her somebody to talk to. And I thought, okay, well, she has anxiety. I mean, this is the big problem, is that she doesn't like the time traveling. Maybe she should be talking to a therapist. And then it became that thing of like, oh, well, what are the therapist's other patients like? Like, what is this her specialty? What's her story? And then from there, the whole thing kind of came spiraling out. But it really just came from a place of wanting to do something myself and wanting a sort of source to put in my own experiences with panic attacks and with anxiety, and trying to kind of put that in a narrative frame that maybe other people could understand, and finding a way to describe what that's like. And then it just kind of spiraled out from there.
It was that the eureka moment when you're like, oh, if the characters are talking to a therapist, here I have the structure for the story. It's like if TV cop shows have the procedural format, I have the therapist format. So when you're putting that together structurally, when you're scripting that, like how did that inform your thinking process about telling the story and delivering that narrative?
It ended up being a real blessing, particularly in the early days, and now it's sort of been a bit of a curse because, it was exactly the eureka moment of, okay, I know how this is going to be formatted now. I know how to structure it, and therapists record their sessions, so that's the way in, and that's also the excuse for why this isn't highly produced, because I knew that I would just be recording it like in my bedroom, which we actually still record all of the episodes in my bedroom. And I knew that it wouldn't be really like slick sounding. So I thought, okay, if it's found footage, then people are going to be okay with that. And now I sort of have painted myself into a corner narratively and structurally with having to have an excuse for the recording. But in the early days, it was really helpful. And then sort of knowing a way into each episode of sort of like, there's the introductory kind of, hello, what's your problem? And then you actually get into it. And also just a place where there doesn't need to be any action. There doesn't need to be really a plot. There doesn't really need to be an arc in an episode. It's really just people exploring their feelings, which is something that as an actor is the aspect of writing that I know, because I know dialogue. I know characters talking about their feelings, and oftentimes as an actor, you're improvising scenes with another character that aren't in the script so that you can kind of get an idea of their relationship and their emotional life. And so it's kind of taking that and putting it into a story and just hoping that people would be into listening to people's therapy sessions. And they were, because it's not just normal people. It's got that hook of, well, what would it actually be like to live with, mind reading ability or an empath ability? And we've since broken out of that format a little bit, but it's always a nice place to return to. And you can get characters to say things that they're not normally going to say, which I think is a huge advantage.
At what point did you realize that even though you had started writing it about Sam, your vehicle, your character, that you realized that, oh, I'm not the anchor of this story, and that it's actually going to be held down by this therapist character, Dr. Bright?
That really happened after I got Julia, who plays Dr. Bright, after she got into the mix, because I'd written the first 9 episodes, which sort of constitutes our first season, and contacted my 3 friends, Julia, Brigham, and Anna, who play the 3 other characters in the first season. And I had this plan for Dr. Bright in those first 9 episodes, and kind of she was initially more of a omnipotent villain character, and I knew what was going on in her life with Mark and everything, but her intentions were not really honorable when I first conceived of her. And then Julia came in and read for the role and brought so much nuance and complexity to the character, and was asking me so many probing questions and coming up with her own idea of who she thought Joan Bright was, that it then just became such a joy to write for her and to push her to straddle this line of like a therapist who's trying to maintain some distance and a person who actually really does care about her patients and cares about her brother. Yeah, I just realized that was sort of the heart of the show.
I think when people write primarily prose, particularly novelists and short story writers, I mean, people often talk about characters developing a mind of their own, or, eventually be kind of taking on a life of their own. But they have a very different consideration process from somebody who's working with actors, because you really do eventually learn to write for the actor themselves, for their portrayal. And over time, I think their performance will affect, the writer too, about, where it goes and, how you develop the character. So it sounds really like it's interesting that, that character changed so much on the page and through that performance, because you wrote for the voice and you found what she brought to the table on it.
Yeah, it's exciting because I mean, all of the actors that I work with are incredibly talented, and they're able to, elevate my writing to a point that's just wonderful. But then they also bring unique perspective to each scene and to each episode, where sometimes I'll write something and I'll have an idea, even if I'm writing it for instance, Charlie Ian, who plays Damien. He is sort of the moment I was starting to write Damien, I was like, okay, it's going to be played by Charlie, because I knew his voice, and he's just got this great, rich voice and can do kind of like smarmy evil really well. And so even though I've been sort of writing towards him for so long, he still will come to the room sometimes. We just recorded last week, episode 38, and he came in and just approached a scene in a way that somehow still surprised me. Like, even kind of knowing him and knowing the actor that he was working with in the scene, it was just so exciting, because now that opens up so many possibilities for the next season and for what I'm writing now, because it's just a slight turn of the screw of what I expected. And it's really fun to be surprised by your own writing that way.
How did you pitch this project to your actors?
Initially, to Julia, Brigham, and Anna, who were the three people that I brought on right at the start, I basically just said, I think I sent them a Facebook message and was like, I have these 9 scripts, because I'd written the scripts before reaching out to them. And it's about, this therapist who has patients who have supernatural abilities, and, it won't be a huge time commitment. You can just come to my house and record. I can't pay you, but it'll literally be like a couple of hours that you'll record these episodes, and then you won't have to worry about it. I'm doing all the post. I think it'd just be fun for us to do. And then I sent them the scripts, and they liked them. But it was really, I was trying to sell it like, it's not going to be a big thing. It's just an experiment. If we like doing it, or it does really well, we'll continue to do it. And by the time we got to the end of the recording, those 9 episodes, we realized that, we were really enjoying the story, and we were in our conversations at recording sessions, we're having lots of ideas about where to take the story, that we wanted to do more regardless of whether it did well. And thankfully it started to do well. But it was really just, I wrote this thing. I like you guys. I'd love to work more with you. And I know that none of you have done a ton of voice acting, so this could be like a fun way to stretch your legs in that arena. And thankfully they said yes.
So with your writing process, you mentioned that you wrote like the first 9 episodes before even really getting started in production.
Yeah.
But you said this is really your kind of first big writing project. So when you're approaching this as an actor, as a screen actor, you're obviously familiar with scripts, but there's a difference between your traditional audio script and your film script. Like, when you sat down to format, did you just jump into Final Draft and you're like, this is the method I know and this is what I'm going with? Or, how did you write those scripts?
Oh, my terrible secret comes out. I use, script writing software for when I'm doing other projects, if I'm, writing TV scripts or film scripts or whatever, and I have a couple of those things spinning. But for the podcast, I use Pages. Like, I don't use an actual script formatting thing, because there's like a radio drama format script, and there's, like BBC has their own way of formatting things, and the old radio dramas had a specific way of formatting, but there's not really the same kind of formatting that you'd find in TV or film, where it's like, it's a minute a page and you have to have these things. And so I just wrote the dialogue straight. I just, it looks like a script, but it's definitely not a minute a page. This is always kind of the weird gamble that we take when recording, because sometimes I'll write a 20-page script and the episode will be 11 minutes. And then sometimes I'll write a 16-page script and the episode will be 32 minutes. Like, it's so uneven in terms of how long the episodes are compared to the scripts. So I really just jumped right in. And for a long time, I was writing, pretty much the first 2 seasons, probably actually even more than that, probably the first 30 episodes of the podcast were written where I would sit down and just write all the way through. Like, I wouldn't, write scene by scene. And in this later half of the season that's coming up in the next couple months, those episodes have been written kind of scene by scene, because they're a little bit more structured and involve more characters and kind of time jump a little bit more. But for the most part, I just sit down, get the 2 characters sitting in the therapy room, and then just write the conversation. And I, act it out loud as I'm writing it, and kind of find those speech patterns and find the flow of the conversation. And then I'll go back and edit, but mostly it's just sort of a brain dump onto a piece of paper.
So you've got a format that is highly episodic, but also has a very serialized element of it. And it's, it gets introduced fairly early on, I think second or third episode, where you first really start to feel that Dr. Bright has this underlying motive and connection to these things and, and what she's going for. And so, when you say that you're kind of sitting down and just kind of cranking them out, what other methodologies are you using to keep track of those broader stories, or are you letting it happen on the page, or is there like a pin board of notes up somewhere?
I definitely have my version of a pin board. I have a blackboard and then a glass top table that I just sort of take a chalk pen to, and that's usually how right now I've got a timeline of, well, I don't want to spoil anything. I've got a timeline on my blackboard right now that's just helping me kind of like as a reference point for something that I'm for some stuff I'm writing. But then at the beginning of every season, or at sort of, in our hiatus in the middle of seasons, I'll kind of map out how many episodes I think we're going to do, which characters I think are going to be in each episode, particularly when it's more focused on the therapy format. I need to figure out, okay, whose sessions are when, and are any other characters coming into those sessions? And then I'll figure out like, okay, what are the big storylines happening this season? What are the big emotional beats? And I'll try to figure out where to place those. But I don't really outline the episodes. I do outline the season roughly like that. And then I kind of have just a document on my computer of just different ideas and different points that I want to get to. And sometimes those things never see the light of day. And sometimes like a big plot point that was supposed to be at the end of season 2 has now been repurposed to end of season 3. And so I will come back to things because there's conflicts that I want to be getting to and character interactions I want to be getting to. But yeah, I use Evernote, the note-taking app, to kind of help me organize everything. And I have, different season notebooks, character notebooks, and all sorts of different things to kind of help organize my thoughts that way. And then I find that writing it out longhand on a chalkboard really helps me map it. And I can draw arrows and kind of cross things out and figure out how the season's going to move. But that's something that definitely was developed like in the second season. And in the first 9 episodes, I just knew there were going to be 3 patients and they were going to get 3 episodes each. And I sort of wrote those episodes I wrote, all of Sam's episodes at once and all of Caleb's episodes at once and all of Chloe's, and then went back in and kind of started to weave a thread through some of those vaguely. Because at that point, I didn't know if it was going to be continued and if we were going to be able to get more actors. And thankfully we got a sound designer, which then opened up my writing to do a lot of more adventurous stuff because I knew that I wouldn't be the one sound editing it. So from there, after those first 9 episodes, I definitely started to be a little bit more focused and organized about the way that the plot was going to move.
What's the editorial process like? I mean, do you have somebody else who's reading scripts before you go into production? How are you getting those vetted ahead of time?
Since the beginning, my sister has been reading all the scripts for sort of 2 reasons. One is that she just has really good taste and I trust her taste and she knows, what I'm trying to go for. And then 2, she is a professional psychologist. So she kind of does all of the therapy checking and making sure that when there's supposed to be good therapy, that it is good therapy. And when there's bad therapy, it's clear that that's, me taking license and just making sure that, I'm defining things correctly and a therapist is talking in a way that a therapist would. So she's kind of been our psychological consultant, which has been amazing. And now a couple of scripts this season I've shown to actors before they're done, or I gave the finale to a friend, the season finale to a friend of mine, because it's a big episode. It's 52 pages, it's the longest episode we've ever done. And it just structurally was getting away from me a bit. So I gave it to her to kind of, because she's got a very structured eye when it comes to scripts and it works in TV. And so I was kind of looking at it through that lens of how it was going to end up playing out that way. And so she took a look at that, but mostly there's not much of an editorial process. Sometimes I'll send a script to an actor and they'll have a question that will make me clarify something or, add in another scene or something like that. But really, it's just my sister who reads the scripts, and then the actors will read them when they're finished.
How long does it take you to construct an individual episode script, typically?
It varies so much. Probably between like a week and 3 weeks from sort of start to finish. Because sometimes when I'm sitting down and I'm writing, I can write an episode, in like a couple of hours. And there have been a couple of episodes that have been written like that. But most of the time I start it, write 3 pages, leave it for a week and come back. And then, there's some episodes like the finale this season that took me 3 months to write and is still going through revisions. But most of the time, I'm working on sort of a 2-week turnaround where I'm Yeah, that's the most time I have for writing and sort of the minimum amount of time I have to give my my sound designer my edit of the recording. So then, that I've got to get 2 weeks from the recording to when I give my edit to the sound designer. So everything's sort of in 2 week increments, because that's kind of how we're able to work. And can sometimes be very fast, so that I'm writing an episode and then 6 weeks later it's being aired. That's, happened before, and that's not ideal. We're really ahead of schedule now with recording, which is nice. But yeah, 2 weeks is kind of as long as I can take sometimes with an episode.
Do you write a lot of the episodes simultaneously? Are you kind of mixing back and forth, or is it really concentrated on one at a time?
It used to be really concentrated one at a time. And then this season, I've really been jumping around, particularly because not every character is in every episode. Sometimes I'll finish an episode that involves a couple characters, and then I'll just go ahead and jump to their next episode because I am on that track and I'm in that mindset. Mostly it moves forward, and then I'll write scattered scenes in future episodes just as I'm thinking of things, but I tend to work pretty linearly.
What's the most challenging aspect of writing this?
Probably at this point, finding an excuse for recording, finding a reason for characters to be together outside of the therapy room and to have them be recording has been a real challenge. And I think, we're stretching it to its farthest point of believability this season. I think the audience is mostly okay with that. They understand that there doesn't need to be a really concrete, believable reason for why we're hearing these recordings. But that can be really challenging. And just then that feeds into the challenge of getting certain characters together in a room, because there are certain conversations that we've been working towards that are just hard to do given where the characters are and kind of what their lives are like. And then sometimes trying to articulate the powers and trying to articulate, what it feels like to be an empath, writing Chloe, who's the mind reader, is really, really hard because she's always 6 steps ahead of everybody else in conversation. That's sort of figuring out what she knows and what she's saying out loud and what conversation she thinks she's having versus the conversation that everybody else is having can be really tricky, where sometimes, a script, I will write out everything that she's hearing and everything that she would be saying out loud if she were having this conversation out loud, and then I'll delete it and kind of, pick what's important, because mind reading is it's just tough. So she's definitely the hardest character to write.
When you talk about using your sister as a reference for the psychological aspect of it, what kind of feedback have you gotten from the audience on that? Because, people can be really touchy about those kinds of things, whether you're doing it properly or, sometimes people can be like, oh, I don't think that you're expressing this problem in a way that's healthy or whatnot. Not that I've seen that critique of your work, but it seems like something that could happen. So how do you manage that, and what kind of feedback have you gotten?
Yeah, thankfully, we don't get a lot of I don't think you're handling this in a healthy way. I think I've seen the occasional criticism about that, but tends to boil down to, I don't like the way that you're treating this character, and I wish that this character were doing something else. And that's something that, that's fine. Like, not everybody's going to like all the decisions I make for my characters. And there are some people who are very affectionate towards certain villainous characters in the podcast, and it's like they want to see him redeemed, and I just can't promise them that. And then there's a lot of assumptions that people make about none of our characters, with the exception of Sam, has really been diagnosed with an actual psychological disorder or mental illness. She has anxiety and PTSD, like that's pretty clear, and then Frank clearly has PTSD, but people will sometimes make leaps based on how we're writing of, oh, I can't believe you're, have made this character do this when they have this disorder. And it's like, okay, well, but you are saying that they have that mental illness. I have not said that. So we get some of that, but mostly people have been pretty happy with how we've done things. And they understand that, when we're taking liberties, that's because it's a podcast about people with superpowers. Like, there are just certain things that are not going to be realistic. So it's funny. I'll see people starting the series now and they'll be like, wow, this therapist is really unethical and is really shady. It's like, yes, she is. And that's the science fiction aspect of it. That's the fiction part of it. But the messages that we do get a lot and the thing that I sort of am most touched by in our listeners is this made me feel less alone. This made me feel better about going to therapy. I never was able to articulate this particular thing until I heard a character articulate it, and I played it for my mom, and now she understands. And, we get messages like that. And that to me is the greatest, gift that the audience could give me. It's incredibly humbling and incredibly helpful to me, who, in many ways started writing this as a way to cope with my own anxiety. And then to see people saying, yes, I also feel this way. and I feel less alone having listened to the podcast, it then turns back around to me where it's like, I feel less alone seeing them feel less alone. So there's a nice cycle there. I think just having somebody who has been in therapy and does struggle with mental health be the person writing it, I'm approaching it from a sympathetic and empathetic place. And I think people understand that. So we've been very fortunate that the majority of the audience has really embraced the psychological aspects of the show.
I want to take a minute to tell you about another of our shows, the Nerd for a Living podcast. Nerd for a Living explores the lives and careers of people working in pop culture and genre entertainment, and the often winding path that's taken them to where they are now. Nerd for a Living has featured interviews with people like Stranger Things star David Harbour, Supergirl stuntwoman and American Ninja Warrior Jesse Graff, Ildi Modrovich, showrunner for Fox's hit series Lucifer, original Ghostbuster Ernie Hudson, and many, many more. We talk with actors, directors, producers, choreographers, writers, and beyond. And we have a big archive of interviews across a wide variety of genre entertainment industries, so there's really something for everyone. Check out nerdforaliving.com for all of our episodes, and subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, or wherever you enjoy your podcasts.
What were you feeding your brain with when you were getting started? Did you get really heavy on research, or were there, other things like whether, it's fiction or nonfiction that really kind of informing your thinking when this was coming together?
I mean, definitely the two kind of narrative and structure things that I was listening to were Welcome to Night Vale and Cabin Pressure, like I said, and those kind of inspired me to make it audio and to take risks in that medium or not take risks and keep things really simple. I think both of those shows they're incredibly different from each other, but they are accomplishing a lot in the audio space. And then that was really encouraging. And then I didn't do a ton of fiction research. Because I've loved science fiction and fantasy my whole life, that stuff was all kind of already packed in there. So I did a lot of research about, different psychological disorders and different mental illnesses. And then also these unheard of disorders like mere touch synesthesia, which is like really, really intense empathy. And there's a great podcast episode actually that Invisibilia does about that disorder. And I did a lot of research on PTSD. And actually I've been doing tons and tons of research for Frank's character, who doesn't even come in as a voice actor until episode 20 something or episode 30 something. I can't even remember at this point. He just has his main episode a couple weeks ago, episode 34. But he is a veteran of Afghanistan who has PTSD. And so I did a lot of research for that. And then for Caleb's story, I have always been a big fan of young adult fiction. So just kind of constantly, feeding myself that and getting into that mindset of teenagers. I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson, I think, has been a huge influence on his character and just the way that he thinks. So for me, I think it was less about doing concrete research and more about trying to find what I think the characters would enjoy. I'm really big into making playlists for my characters. That's something I've always done as an actor. And so, figuring out what music the characters like and what they listen to and what movies they like, what books they read, getting into their brains that way was really helpful.
That's really interesting. So take Sam, for instance. What's in her playlist? What is she checking out?
So for Sam's playlist, it was a lot of like mellow folk music, kind of like sad music. And then there's a theme of home throughout, because she's sort of, she lost her parents when she was young, and she's kind of has no friends or family and is constantly being ripped out of her own time and put somewhere else, that she's always looking for the sense of belonging and the sense of home. So kind of finding songs that thematically fit that. And then we're also fitting an aesthetic thing of like kind of the soft folk music that you would listen to like on a snowy afternoon, curled up by the window with your cat and a cup of tea, like kind of figuring out, what the activity is you'd be doing while listening to this music was. And then, of course, just it ends up being a playlist of stuff that I really like, because she and I are very similar. And that's true of a lot of the characters. It's mostly music that I like because I'm taking it from my own library, but then kind of, finding a theme in the lyrics and then also in kind of the sound aesthetic of the thing. So like, Dr. Bright, it's more kind of oldies, because I think she and her brother listened to, records a lot when they were young, even though they were kind of past that age. I think they were into that stuff. Caleb kind of like angry dudes with the guitar for a little while. It's always fun to kind of build those things and think about how to structure them and what the theme is. And then I listen to them when I'm writing, and I listen to them before I'm writing to kind of get in that character's mindset.
Do you share those with the actors too?
Yeah, they're all on our website now, actually. They've been something that the audience has really loved. But yeah, whenever a new actor comes on board, I'll kind of send them, a bio and then the playlist and, some other things, just to sort of be like, this is who this person is. I don't know if this will be helpful for you, but here you go. They've really enjoyed it, I think. And some of them have even made their own mixes themselves, which has been really great. Like Julia made an awesome mix as Dr. Bright to give to her brother when he went to college. And Brigham has made a mix as Caleb to give to Adam. And so there are a couple in-universe mixes as well, which is really fun.
That must be really fun for you as a creator to see those things kind of come alive with your cast and have them like thinking as their character and sharing that stuff. And it's very meta, but it's really fun, the extra element on top of it.
It is so much fun. And they've totally outdone themselves. I mean, I've always tried to kind of like have an aspect of multimedia. So, there's the playlist, and then some of the characters have social media. Like Sam has a blog and Chloe has a Tumblr. Caleb and Adam both have Instagrams. And Caleb's Instagram now I have not posted anything on it for months and months and months because Brigham just took it over. And he just runs that Instagram now as Caleb, as his character. And then Julia, we were kind of talking over the summer when we were on hiatus. We were like, we want to do something that's multimedia for Dr. Bright and her brother, maybe when they were kids. And so she wrote this entire notebook of like notes from Dr. Bright to her brother and vice versa of them throughout their childhood. And it's just incredible. And both of these things, I have nothing to do with. I don't give them stuff to write about or things to post. And they just know who the characters are. And they'll check with me about timeline stuff or say, can I do this or is this going to spoil something? But other than that, they really just run with it. And it's incredibly rewarding. And then it feeds my writing, which is such a gift.
Do you feel an evolution in the creation of the show that makes you think about other media, whether a complete new adaptation of something? Obviously, as an actor, I mean, I think, screen ideas probably come pretty naturally.
Sure. Yeah.
I think, when you're telling something in an audio setting, what can be really fun about that is telling a story that really just works in that format.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that methodology that you have definitely has that going for it. But at the same time, I mean, I definitely could see this adapting otherwise. So do those ruminations go through your head? Do you play with those concepts?
Yes, that's definitely kind of always on my mind. And it has been the entire time because, in order to write compelling characters and to write a show that holds together, I've needed to think about all of these different aspects of their lives and of the world and of these things that we don't get to hear on the podcast at all. And to actually be able to explore that in like TV or in books or in these different mediums would be so much fun because for a long time we were just in the therapy room, and that's great. And that's a fun place to be. But at the same time, getting to see these different aspects of the characters' lives would be really fun. And then also I think, doing an adaptation of the show would be really great because I think every writer, looks at their earlier stuff and thinks, I would love to redo this. I would love to tell this a little bit better, a little bit, differently. So definitely kind of getting to repave that road would be really, really fun. And so, yeah, I mean, hopefully one day we'll be able to explore the story in different formats. I'm hopeful. I think it could work in lots of different formats. So I'm constantly kind of thinking about what things I would want to take and what I would want to kind of rejigger and what I would want to explore. So yeah, stay tuned, I guess would be the thing to say.
Well, and as you mentioned on that panel again at Emerald City, talked about how this has really led you into a lot more writing work. And was that intentional? Is that just a completely random side effect of it? Is that now this is where your career's going when it was kind of done as a lark?
It wasn't directly intentional. It wasn't unintentional. I think, in my wildest dreams, I sort of thought like, okay, well, if this does really well, then maybe this will lead to, bigger and greater things and then a bigger sandbox to play in. And I was always sort of having that in the back of my mind while also thinking like, okay, but this is just a thing I'm making in my bedroom. Like it's not, it probably won't lead to bigger and brighter things. So it was definitely a pipe dream. And I do love writing. And I think the thing I love the most, I think, is just, coming up with characters and coming up with the worlds and kind of coming up with the ideas for things. And the fact that this has, led to maybe more opportunities to do that is really exciting. And I mean, I love acting and I would love to do more of it, but ultimately I just really like, I mean, it sounds terribly cheesy, but I like storytelling. And, this has led to more opportunities for me to tell stories. And so, I mean, that was, intentional. I think the idea was, okay, if this does well, then I will have a larger platform to tell more stories. So I'm really glad that that's what's happened. I feel very, very lucky.
You mentioned that your background in education was music.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how does that translate? Did you take other creative classes that led this way, or is it completely separate channels?
That's a great question. Yeah, I've never taken a creative writing class, which is something that I deeply regret now because I think I probably could have really benefited from one. I mean, it's never too late. I came to music kind of by way of acting because I am a singer and grew up in New York and was kind of a Broadway baby. So for a long time thought that I was going to go and do musical theater. I love musical theater. So then I got to college and I was, doing the theater thing and then just fell in love with actually music scholarship. So not even performing or writing music, but writing about music and talking about how society and music intertwine and relate to one another. So that was kind of like, basically, I ended up getting a degree in what was essentially a hobby, which is like thinking about musical from a critical standpoint. But I definitely for a little while thought about going into music journalism or something like that. And then realized that, being critical about something that you love can sometimes take away the love of it. But I mean, music to me is sort of the purest form of expression and the easiest way to get to the emotional center of something. So I think even though I have no skill in writing music, just being somebody who appreciates it and understands it and sort of understands telling a story through audio and through kind of the structured song is not that different from writing a podcast or just writing in general and trying to think about what's the emotional heart of the song and where does it come from in the character and what's effective about this musical. I just think anybody who writes should listen to Sondheim all the time. I think he's like one of the, he's the greatest musical writer ever and one of the greatest writers ever. And I think you can just learn so much about emotion and storytelling and themes and overarching plots from his shows. And so I think just absorbing that growing up and then really delving into it from an academic standpoint in college just has made me more, I guess, introspective about my own writing and critical of my own writing in a way that's hopefully productive.
Have you ever thought about doing a musical episode?
Oh, yes. It's something that many of our listeners have asked for. And a good portion of the cast sings. So it's something I would love to do. I have the concept for it. I know what it would be. I know the structure of it. And I just, as I said, cannot write music. So I have a couple friends who are very, very good at writing music. So it's one of those things that, like when I'm done with A, B, and C on my insane to-do list, I'll hopefully get to that someday. But it's always spinning back there.
Well, there's a nice precedent for it, particularly in genre storytelling. If you look at, obviously Buffy is Once More with Feeling, the most recent Flash and Supergirl crossover.
Fringe had a musical episode.
Oh, did they? Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
I grounded out on Fringe like at the end of the first season. I've always needed to go back and just haven't gotten to it.
Oh, it really holds up the whole time. It's really good.
I need to jump back to that. Yeah, for sure. It's like anything. Like there's so much great storytelling, particularly great serial storytelling available now. I mean, like people talk a lot about the golden age of TV and talk about like the huge rise of podcasting and stuff. And I feel like just trying to, especially with podcasts, I find myself extending chores around the house or making an excuse to go do laundry just so I can listen to the next episode of something. And there's so much good stuff.
My apartment has never been cleaner than like when I'm listening to podcasts. It's great.
I do appreciate that it's the thing that like I'm the house spouse, work from home, freelancer and doing the podcast and all that stuff. And, all those things that become like the house responsibilities, the blow is lessened to my enjoyment of life by having podcasts and those stories that I can be feeding myself all the time. And so I think that is super exciting. So, Lauren, this has been awesome. I really love this look into how this came together and the ability to try out storytelling in this really interesting format that's bite-sized and episodic and allows you to develop over time. I think for a lot of people who want to write novels, like that's a huge undertaking to try to get done versus smaller episodic elements where you can kind of develop your voice over time. which I think is really cool.
Yeah, I really recommended it as a way to get into writing for young or inexperienced writers, because it's fairly low stakes and you can really take your time with it and figure it out. And if no one listens, it's okay. Like you're learning, and that's great. Or it could, you could have lots of listeners and you could learn that way. And it's a really great community right now and a great format to explore.
So what other things should we be looking for from you alongside the latest season of the Bright Sessions?
There's some potentially, exciting stuff in the works. I can't talk about any of it at the moment. But season 3 of the Bright Sessions will be airing until the first week of June. So we've got that. And then in terms of where you can sort of find me, I will be participating in the Women in Podcasting Festival in October that WNYC is hosting here in LA. So if you are interested about getting into podcasts and you are a lady or lady identifying person, then you should definitely look into tickets for that, because it's going to be a bunch of workshops and talks and just conversations about all different aspects of podcasting. So I'm really excited about that and kind of prepping what exactly I want, my seminar thing to be, or my panel to be. And then, just follow me on Twitter for the exciting things that I can't yet talk about, so that when I can talk about them, you can see them. And
are you guys doing any more of like the Comic-Con scene?
Not yet. We're very, very new to the Comic-Con scene. Emerald City was only my second con, and my first as a guest or as someone, as a professional there. So I don't really know how to go about doing it. So it's one of those things. Another thing on the to-do list that's like I want to get to, and we would love to do more of, and it's just a matter of when and where and how and organizing all of that. But so if you have a convention that's coming up in your town and you want, the Bright Sessions to show up, please tell them, email them and let them know, so that they can maybe find a space for us, because we would love to go and visit places.
We should definitely chat about that, because we do a lot of conventions. We do programming at San Diego Comic-Con and stuff along those lines, and other fun stuff. So we will stay in communication with those things, because
absolutely, that would be great.
Especially, I think that we're also seeing a rise in live performance podcast as people want to see that. I mean, I've seen Welcome to Night Vale live, in theater, which is I think is actually a better experience. A really interesting, really fun evolution of that concept. Seeing it live is, especially with the actor who plays Cecil. His name is actually Cecil, isn't it? Yeah,
Cecil.
He is
he's
tremendous live, and that whole cast was terrific. Seeing it, so more opportunities to encounter things like that is super fun. Yeah,
a live show is another wish list thing for the Bright Sessions. So. Maybe someday.
I think you can make it happen. You're in LA, so, right?
Exactly.
Opportunities abound.
We've got all the assets we need. Yeah, it's just a matter of me writing it.
Just one more thing for you to do, Lauren.
One more thing.
While you're working on that musical episode,
Yeah, got so much free time. It's great.
Well, Lauren, this has been great. I really appreciate it. I'll make sure everybody checks out what's left of the third season of the Bright Sessions. Like you said, runs until June, and we'll be really interested to see what those new things that are coming down the pipeline from you, because I think you're a very exciting voice and creator, and I'm really excited to see what you do next.
Thanks so much. It was so good to talk to you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Fictitious. The Bright Sessions is currently in its third season. You can catch up on the entire series on iTunes and find out more at their website, thebrightsessions.com. The home for Fictitious and all of the Nerd for a Living family of podcasts is nerdforaliving.com. Check out our full archive of episodes, sign up for our mailing list, or send us an email there with feedback. We'd love to hear from you. Then follow us on Twitter, where we are at Nerd for a Living, and I'm on there too as at Adrian Buskey. Tweet at us with what you're currently reading or writing, or #amreading, #amwriting. Fictitious is available on iTunes and many other apps and services. Subscribe for more interviews with awesome creators. If you like the show, maybe use those fancy words of yours to write us a review. It helps other people find out about us and helps us bring you more excellent guests. This podcast is produced by Wendy Buskey and me, Adrian Buskey. Fictitious and the Nerd for a Living family of podcasts are a production of Armadian Media and Entertainment. Now then, author friends, get back to writing. Unless you're driving right now, in which case, keep doing that for a bit. I'm sure autoplay will take you right into the next episode.